Welcome dear friends, this is a new video in the Daoist healthcare program, and we are going today talk about gender fluidity, and not just about gender fluidity within Daoism, but we will talk a little bit about it in different cultures, but especially how meditation actually plays a role in gender fluidity. And if you are interested in these kind of topics, then you definitely have to see this video all the way to the end. For more interesting things about this topic and related topics or other topics, just check out the whole channel, and if you feel like join us on the channel, make sure that you get briefings on the topics that we talk about so that you can stay in touch. At this moment we are talking about female meditation for women, and in the Daoist idea of meditation for both men and women, there are some aspects I discussed also in the previous video, so make sure you also look at that video. And this video is a little bit more specific, and it goes a little bit towards the material sides and effects and relationship with other cultures as such. You might know that I have studied anthropology as part of my studies, but also I have been living in a gender fluid community for a while here in Amsterdam in the 1980s, and in that process I have learned a lot, and I'm going to brief you a little bit on these kind of things. You have to understand that this topic is very closely related to yijing studies. Yin-yang is very often confused by Westerners with female and male, and although female are yin, yin is not female. Although men are yang, yang is not male, because both male and female have yin and have yang at the same time. So it is rather confusing. But there is also this idea in Western culture that Daoism, Daoists, they are looking for the feminine within themselves. And although that is not completely untrue, it is also not completely true. So let's investigate a little bit more about this and try to see if we can unravel this as a side effect of meditation, and then also of course specifically the role for femininity or womanhood, and especially in this time where so many kids are struggling with this topic of gender choices. This is seemingly, at least in my opinion, quite an important topic, because our culture of course is in change, and this is not the first culture that this happened to, and we're going to investigate a little bit about that. First of all, you have to understand that feminine behavior in male in Western culture is very often associated with being gay, and in the reality of course that is not necessarily so. There are a lot of men that are feminine in nature because of their hormonal or whatever kind of circumstances, and maybe because of the behavior that they learned in all kinds of circumstances. We're going to talk about that. When we look at that, when we talk about gender fluidity, we talk about basically gender swapping, as the title already suggests. And at the moment when we talk about gender swapping, that means that men are behaving more feminine and women are behaving more masculine, and there is a difference between the physical gender swapping and the emotional experience-based gender swapping. So there's this anthropologist, he's called Michael G. Belletz, and he talked about genders in 5 different kinds. When we look at his ideas, we look at the content of his book, Gender, Sexuality and Body Politics in Modern Asia. And he did a lot of research about gender issues in South Asia, and part of what he is talking about we actually will include in here. And he discerns mainly 5 different types of gender: male, female, of course, that is simple, androgenic types, hermaphroditic types, and neutral types. So these 5 genders, they belong to each other. It's almost like the Wu Xing in Chinese philosophy. So when we talk about androgynous, that means that people, they do not have any specific gender characteristics. When somebody is hermaphroditic, he has both different qualities. He has both a male and a female part, like Shiva in Indian religion. The Shiva god has both a yoni and a lingam, so he has two different kind of qualities. At the moment when we look at the neutral, it is neither this, neither that. So that sounds almost like androgynetic, but it is not exactly. And we're not going to go into that kind of depth at this point, because our point is specifically related to meditation, of course. In the yijing, the gender issues are usually discussed among water and fire politics in hexagram number 63 and 64, where male and female aspects, they are interchanging with each other. When they are interchanging properly with each other, then water and fire, of course, male and female in that sense, when they are properly harmonizing each other, it makes a very powerful and strong person. But if they are disconnecting, that means that somebody gets confused. And in our society, this confusion part has become a larger part. You can become very strong as a person using your gender, but the switching of gender has become very much materialized into the physical materialization of a male or a female gender, and that is not always helpful to conclude like that, to conclude our life like that, because many people who switch gender later on change their mind again, and as a result of that, of maybe operations that they did, they cannot switch back again. It's the same like when you take a facelift surgery, your face is going to change. Once it has been changed, you can never go back to your original face anymore, and then you get identity confusion. You get a confused identity. As a result, that an emotional crisis is quite natural to come about. I already said a little bit about my own youth. When I was in the 1970s, late 1970s, there was this punk movement rolling all over Europe, and that was very exciting, and we did do a lot of things as a result of that, like squatting and rioting and fighting against the government and so on. These were all really great, but at a certain point in the 80s you got first this new wave movement, and then you got the Gothic movement, and the Gothic movement allowed for a lot of experiment with how we are looking. And although they were originally pointing themselves towards ideas about vampires and all kinds of other dark figures, and the music was pretty dark, there was also this sensation happening in there where people became more fluid and mixed up in their gender, so in clothing style, makeup for men, dressing in dresses and female clothes, and mixed all kinds of things. People started experimenting with how it feels to be more male or female, and you had very macho goths and you had very feminine goths, and in all these cases we're talking mostly about the male perspective. The female perspective was in some ways very sexistic, because many women, they were supposed, just like with the punk movement, to look mostly sexy, but also a lot of women, they started taking on more male roles in the way how they dress and how they behaved. So you can see that there was this change in there. And let's go a little bit deeper into this, because when I was part of that and I had the opportunity to investigate all these things and also experience these things for myself, I realized, okay, we are very makeable in how we feel about things. Our biology, either we're born with it or not born with it, can change, but in general we can say our feelings are being shaped by the things we come across and that we are impressed with. So if you stay a long time in a group of people who are gender switched, you will gradually also become like that. And I felt a lot of social peer pressure to eventually go into an operation to do gender swapping, because even among people who are feeling mixed about their gender, there is a lot of confusion about what they want and what they don't want. And as a result of that, also a lot of addiction to either alcohol, drugs and so on, to make sure that they can suppress all these kind of feelings. That doesn't mean that they are necessarily unjust in their feelings, because that's not what I'm saying at all, because all these feelings, they are real, and throughout history many peoples have shown in different cultures how important this gender swapping is. There are a few things though that we would like to go through together so that we have a good image of what it actually means. I don't know if you've ever heard about an organization called GLAAD, GLAAD. They say of all the millennials in the world, or in the Western world probably, 12% of all the millennials, they feel more like transgender, or feel like changing gender, or feel mixed up about which gender they actually are. When we look at the United Nations information, they say that worldwide there is between 0.05% to 1.7% of the population which bears sexually mixed marks. These are then physically altered states of existence that are shaping the mentality and the options in life for a person. At the moment, when we look at these differences, then you can see, okay, so there's this huge percentage of people who feel like that. They feel like they're in the wrong body, or maybe they are feeling in the wrong body because people tell them they are in the wrong body. And there is this very small percentage of people who actually have mixed genders. It's the same like with twins. You have a lot of different kinds of twins because the twinness depends on which moment the egg splits and becomes two individuals. The earlier that is, or the later that is, there will be changes as a result of that. I'm not going to go into that at this moment also. But at the moment, when we look at the formation of our genders throughout history, in the evolution of men, genders, and the fluidity of the expression of our genes has always been very clear. But it also means that the expression of genes don't mean necessarily something, because it depends on circumstances through which they become more clearly expressed. Maybe because of medication of the parents, maybe because of the biological environment in which they were created, whatever kind of reasons, then at that moment creates that opportunity for the biology to adjust. Maybe these are the new Homo superior, you don't know, and you can't judge these kind of things because you don't know. And the judgment of these kind of people, even if they just feel like they're in the wrong body, that is just saying more about you than it is actually saying about them, because you cannot accept the fact that they feel like that, and therefore also you can't understand how these people can be helped or how they can find a place in society. So let us give a few examples of this and go get into this. In South Asia, we talk about what is called the hijra. I'm not sure if I pronounce it right, so if I say it wrong, then please don't blame me. The Kama Sutra, a very famous text about sexuality, already mentions them, and the Kama Sutra is already of some antiquity. And as a result of that, we know already that these kind of people already exist for a long time. They are called in the Kama Sutra the third gender, and that means that they are sort of a mix-up between male and female. The Hijra were mostly born as a male, but they started expressing, or they identified as a feminine, and therefore also dressed like that. It was an accepted gender. There was no conviction of it. Is actually because of the influence of the West that eventually they became repressed. And at this time, as far as I understand, there's legal recognition of this gender as a factual something, which is of course what we call progress. In America, the first people, they also had something, and they said they were possessed by a double spirit. So it means that they were not just one person, but they were two people. And it was a state of existence that would come up, maybe suddenly, maybe because of trauma or whatever kind of reason. Maybe they felt like that by nature, and they dressed feminine, but they were also very often seen as important healers within their society. So as a result of that, they were seen as a sort of conduits between the spirit beings and the human beings. So as a result of that, they played an important role of communication, and in healing, of course, that was very often used. It was not always like that, but also these people, they were able to transform also later on back to warriors or people or workers, whatever kind of role patterns there were in that society. So it was not seen as something necessarily permanent into the state of existence of that person. In ancient Egypt, people thought about reincarnation. So when you were going to reincarnate, then you would have to be a man, because they didn't believe that women could reincarnate. But there was a way out. So if you would die, they would paint you red, which was seen as the traditional color of man, probably because of sunburn their whole life, working out into the sunshine. But at the moment when they were buried, they were painted red, and they were painted with their breast flattened, so they would become more marked as male at the moment when they would get into the realm of the death, and then when they would pass, they would be able to reincarnate. So that was a very interesting thing to see. But what you see in this process is that, first of all, there is this discrepancy between male and female. That means that male are seen as more human than female. Female were not completely seen as human because they couldn't reincarnate. And they could fool the system basically by becoming more male-like. And you see this idea that women are not as human as men in many cultures. Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, and Buddhism in general, they were pretty much in the past not recognizing that women could reincarnate. Only men could reincarnate. And they were not seen as women. Oh, actually they could reincarnate, but they could only reincarnate as men to get into the next life, reincarnated maybe as a Buddha or a Lama or something. Then in Islam also similar, women were not exactly seen as equal to women. And that doesn't mean that the Quran didn't brand women with specific rights through which they were more equal to men than before, but not in the way how it is being executed usually in many branches of Islam. Of course, there are also branches of Islam where that is not a problem, where women are equal. And like many religions, Islam also is in a fluid state, and it is the radicalism that we see right now in some countries. This is like the last moves of a dying corpse, and the person turning into a corpse. That means that the fanaticism is for people who are trying to hold on to a past and the privileges that they had in the past. You see the same in America, in the political system, the way how the white supremacists and related organizations are moving about. They are also a dying breed, and they are trying to jerk very hard on the system in the hope that they can maintain their power. And they will eventually, of course, disappear. And as a result of that, if we can sit it out, if we manage to survive sitting it out, then that kind of attitude will be something for the museum. Going back to the Islam, there was a third gender idea present, and that was that there is a sort of a perfect kind of person, which is called, let me see, because my Arabic is not so very good, al-insan al-kakal, I think, something like this. Anyway, this word, so please, my Arabic is not very good, but these people, they are seen as genderless, and in Islam they are seen as perfect. So perfect people, they are genderless. So the more masculine or the more feminine you are, the more imperfect you actually are. So that is of course very sad to hear for everybody, because almost everybody is either male or female. In Chinese culture, you see this also in Christianity. You see that women were seen as less. In modern corporations, women are still paid less than men. In taxing people, women are taxed differently or seen differently or secondary to their husband in many countries. There's all kind of reasons why there is no equality between male and female. And then of course when you are gay, or like in the two-spirited people, Native American sense, then at that moment you see that in the modernization of all these kind of movements, you see that these people become part of the gay pride movement. and they are specifically denominated as being gay, which is not necessarily so. That is also something that needs to be said sometimes. You don't need to be gay to be feminine or to have actually a preference for being in a female body. That would be actually a strange assumption. Why? There was also a similar kind of third gender. These were called the Maha, and the Maha were usually, they identified themselves as something between male and female. And as a result of this position, they were giving roles such as caretakers, healers, nurses, and so on and so on. And they were an accepted and normal part of society as far as we can look back into the Hawaiian culture. In Chinese culture, things are a little bit different. Let's go talk about that. In Chinese culture, traditionally, rationality was very highly prized. That is something that you need to know. Confucianism, which is seen as a secular philosophy by many people, is not necessarily secular, but it is very rational about all kinds of things. The society as it was developed from Confucianism and the other strands of thinking in the Chinese culture saw that you could only be fully male or female if you would comply with certain kind of role patterns. That means that you are only perfect as a man when you would become a father, and you would only become a woman when you would prove that you can have babies. So that means that your gender was related to your formal being able to reproduce. So this is something that is very important. It doesn't mean there were no male and female. Of course, they knew about male and female, but they were of less importance than your role as father or mother. Then at the moment when you look at this male and female in Chinese culture, you can see that boys were very often dressed up as girls because spirits, ghosts and so on, they were not so interested in possessing the body of a girl than in a boy, because a boy had socially a much higher standing. Like in Buddhism, also in Chinese culture, women were only half taken serious, even though in Confucianism there was a high respect for femininity, womanhood, because of the role that they could play in the family, but they were attributed to being mothers, while the fathers were the actual creators of the family, and all the children, they were sort of a possession of the family and they had to do their work within that family. So there was no equality in the sense that it was easy for a woman to become a matriarch in the family, although there were some tribes where that was more normal. But there were some very famous examples of empresses, queens, that were being seen as aberrations and evil and so on at a later time, simply because they were very powerful and creative, and they were doing their job as an empress very well, and they behaved indeed imperial, but because they were women, they were not acceptable to the general audience of the courts. Then on the courts there was a lot of partying going on. It was not just all politics, and they were provided with tools to party in the form of boys, girls, men, women, anything in between. And when Western missionaries came, they were surprised about the lax sexual discipline in the courtiers, in the sense that they had all kind of play toys around them for sometimes indefinite gender, like for instance eunuchs who helped in or assisted in sexual practices, or well, what they would consider gay people, or hermaphrodites, or androgenic types. Of course, they were mostly pandering towards the male courtiers, but I am sure the female courtiers also had their part in some fun, even though they were hidden away behind the wall of eunuchs. In Daoism, there is this idea that Daoists are training to become more feminine, that their being feminine is seen as an important attribute in their development towards understanding Tao. And although it is not completely untrue, it is also not completely true. In reality, through meditation, a meditator and the way of meditating and the transformation of the different kind of processes they go through, they actually become more feminine because their hormonal structure will change, and as a result of that their male hormones will become less, and as a result of that their male sexuality also will become less pronounced, and as a result of that they will start showing more feminine looks, but also as a result of that maybe a more feminine kind of emotionality, and the meditation then has to help them to control that emotionality at the same time. For women it is exactly the same, in the sense that the women, they have to meditate and they have to undo their feminine characteristics. The effect is that their breasts will shrink, their vagina will close, and the menstruation will stop, and their blood circulation becomes part of the circulation of yang in the body. So it means that the blood and the heat in the blood is being used to nourish the yang, and as a result of that the chemistry of the body is going to change, and as a result of that also their feelings will change. So the normal changeability between the hormones and the shedding of, for instance, the fascia in the body, which takes place in women all the time, being rebuilt and shedded and rebuilt and shedded, that is also going to change. That means they become more continuous and they become more like male. That means that the ideal imagery of Daoist men is that they become more feminine, but the ideal portrait of women is that they become more masculine, and as a result of that change they grow more towards each other. So you can see that there is the male and the female, they meditate, they develop. In the first stage they develop their jing. At the moment when their jing is getting developed, then their bodies become more strong and firm and healthy, and they get access to all kind of new functions as a result of that. When you are weak, when your body is not properly developed, there's a lot of functions that you don't really have. Yes, sure, there's a lot of people, for instance, who can call themselves a healer or telepathic or telekinetic or whatever kind of things as a disease factor, but not necessarily as a factor of health. So when people go train as a Daoist, they first learn to restore health, and then they go learn these qualities. These qualities are inherent in being human, apparently, and as a result of that, it is better to have a good control over it by being good in control over yourself, so that you do not exhaust yourself as a result of that. Because you see that a lot of healers, they are addicted, or they are overweight, or they have all kind of other diseases, or emotional problems, irregularity, so to say, so that their gifts are not really reliable enough. Yeah, reliable enough, that maybe is enough. Normally when people meditate, they are not being told that they will start having gender changes. Even within regular meditation from Buddhism or Daoism or from Hinduism, all these kind of things, they're not usually talked about that you will change gender-wise somewhat to a lot. But if you are interested in gender changes, then of course these kind of things might actually be very interesting, because you can harmonize yourself through this way of personality transformation in these kind of methods, and especially in the Daoist practice, that is a very important part. So going back to this first stage, at the moment when you get there, then at that moment you're still male and female, and at the moment when you are changing gradually through the alchemical process, your gender quality has already been starting to retract when you are still developing your jing, and as a result of that, gradually you become more alike, and then at that moment you become more androgynous. You do not become like Shiva, hermaphrodite, but you become more androgynous, and you become something like male but not male, female but not female. And because of this similarity, then at that moment the paths, they come together again, and this is where the practice then continues again in all kind of other stages, where you're getting ready for the servitude in heaven, the next stage. So I hope that was very interesting, and if you are interested in gender issues in general, there are a lot of people struggling with it, so always make sure you have enough compassion for people who are struggling with these kind of things. Do not reject them. You don't have to become like one if you don't want to, but make sure that they always feel safe. In this time and age, you see that because of the movement towards the right in Western culture, but not only in the West, also in Asia. People become more conservative and they become more scared of all kinds of things. One of the things that they are scared of is people who are not exactly functioning the way that they do. And in our culture, we do not really have a coping mechanism for things that are different from us. In many other cultures, they have, because that process has been accepted as part of society for a long time. And as a result of that, people on whatever boundary of genderishness, they might feel less comfortable in the future as a result of this growing aversion to anything strange. That is very unfortunate. When you are in a situation where you are experiencing yourself as conflicted with your gender and you have questions about it, make sure you go ask somebody. You can ask me, you can join the Daoist program. I will definitely make sure that I guide you as good as possible through that process so that you can help yourself to get to the point where you have full control over your experiences and can use them for the qualities that you need to be, so that you can find your strength point, so to say, and as a result of that improve the quality of your life and the quality of the life of the people around you. I do not want to say that you have to become gender fluid as a result of meditation. And it depends a little bit on how far you are willing to go in that process. For most people, the first stage where you are in the yijing level is going to be more than sufficient. So you can maintain all your gender issues if you want to, but you can move past that, and then you are very suitable material for the next stage. Yeah, I think that's it. And that is always going to be difficult. Moving into another culture, moving into another gender, moving into another country, all these kind of things, they are tough. Because you will meet resistance here and there, and you need help with that if you need it. Thank you very much for listening, and make sure you sign up and you preferably also start taking part in our weekly classes so that we can talk about these things more, and also at the same time make sure that you eventually also become a professional human. And if you have questions about how to become a professional human, just ask me.